Shalom to our dear friends. This is Rabbi Yehudah Glick speaking to you from Jerusalem. And today we are a day before the holiday of Purim. And I really would like to invite you all to join us and study with us the book of Esther. Before I begin, I'll just tell you that tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Israel time, we will be broadcasting live reading of the book of Esther with a very wonderful tune and trying to really make it lively. And I think that it's really a great book, teaches us. And so we are part of the Torah coming in from Jerusalem. And I invite all of you to join us and study with us the book of Esther. Today I'm just going to read a few words and share with you a few thoughts I have on the first chapter of the book of Esther. Mainly, the main question I would begin with is, we all know the story of Esther. I think it's the well-known story of the decree to destroy the people of Israel, which miraculously God saved the people of Israel. But I think that the question I would say is, what does the first chapter of the book of Esther want to bring us, to tell us? What would be lacking from the story of the book of Esther if we would not have the first chapter? So let's just go over a briefing of what the first chapter talks about. There are, I'd say, three topics in the first chapter. I'm opening the book of Esther. We have the first verses all the way up to verse 9. Well, verse 8, I would say, is the King Ahasuerus, his kingdom, his celebrations, the parties, his conferences. I don't know exactly what you would call them. Ahasuerus, the king, has his party. Then, from verse 9, his wife Vashti is also organizing a party. His wife Vashti is organizing a party for the women. And we have to wonder and try to understand why do they need a separate party for the women? Are they so modest in Persia, in Shushan, that they have to have a separate seating event? From verse 12, suddenly there's a surprising turn point. Vashti refuses to come. Ahasuerus invites his wife Vashti. She refuses to come. And then I would say from verse 13 till the end of the chapter, we are discussing the sentence of Vashti. How is she going to be punished for refusing to come to the party of Ahasuerus? Oh, before I begin, I just want to say hello to all my dear friends that are with us today, and it's really wonderful to see Victoria Schill and to see Mark from Florida, and to see from Naples, Florida, and to see Robert from Jacksonville, Florida. So today we are studying the first chapter of the book of Esther. And I really would like to share with you some thoughts that I have about the book. So let's just read through the first chapter and see what are the points. As I said, it begins with the parties of Ahasuerus. Excuse me, my camera fell down for some reason. I apologize. So the first part talks about Ahasuerus' parties. Ahasuerus has two parties. One for the ministers, which lasts for 180 days. And then for the city, for the people of Shushan, which is the final 7 days. I think the 180 days and the 7 days are happened at the same time. The last seven days of the 180 days are the people, all the people of Shushan are invited. The second part we said was the party that Vashti has. So let's read a little about the first party that Ahasuerus. We'll just start from the first verse. Ahasuerus rules over 127 countries. What is this number 127? Of course, they're not countries, but they're I would say districts or little. But what is the number 127? 127 brings us back to Sarah. Abraham's wife, she lived 127 years. And it's quite interesting because in the book of Genesis, where we talk about the death of Sarah, and we see that Sarah dies at the age of 127, we're actually talking about two people who lost their wives. The book of Esther talks about Achashverosh, who lost his wife. And the book of Genesis is talking about Abraham who's losing his wife. And look at the great difference between these two people. Abraham, in the chapter that he's losing his life, is crying, is being sad about the loss of his wife. I'm talking about Genesis 24. At the same time, in the chapter that talks about the king, Achashverosh, who rules over 127 nations, by him, we're talking about a person who's celebrating. And celebrating a king who is not crying, but is drunk. So what are we talking about? I'm so sorry. This is the second time. I don't know what's going on here today. The camera is falling down. I don't know why. I hope everything's okay here. I just don't understand what's going on here. So I want to go in and see exactly, we're in the book of Esther, and we're going to continue what we're studying here. So what is the purpose of the parties? It says in verse 4, he's showing his riches and his glorious kingdom. His riches and his glorious kingdom. It's interesting. Those of you who recall another king, King Solomon. King Solomon, as you recall, in chapter 6 of the book of Kings, God tells him, I'm offering you richness and honor. And what does King Solomon choose? He chooses a heart that understands. And God says to him, since you did not choose richness and honor, I will give you them both. I will give you them both. And God gives wisdom to Solomon. And right afterwards, we see that Solomon celebrates. So we see that we have a king called Achashverosh who's celebrating his richness, and he's celebrating with the ministers his power. And at the same time, we have Solomon who is celebrating his wisdom. What else do we see about Pharaoh Achashverosh? He's celebrating, and he's coming off to show off. What is he showing off? He's showing off his richness. When he shows his richness and his glorious kingdom. And then he calls his wife, Vashti. He tells her to come also. Because for Achashverosh, his wife is also one of his parts, one of his objects of his royalty kingdom. That's what his wife is. So we see here, as we said, King Solomon then made a celebration in his third year, celebrating not his wisdom and not his richness, but his wisdom of heart, understanding. And Achashverosh celebrating and showing off everything, including his own wife. What is the whole thing made of? The whole courtyard in verse 6, white fine cotton, blue embroidered with cords and linen and purple, and silver rods and marble columns and couches of gold. Everything is just to show off how great he is, what he is. And who is he inviting? It says in verse 5, everybody from the great to the small. Those of you who are familiar with the Bible can remember there's one other time where a king invites his people, but from the small to the big. In the book of Jonah, chapter 4, the king of Nineveh is inviting his people from the small to the big. What is he inviting the people to do? King of Nineveh is inviting the people to repent. Where King Achashverosh is inviting people to show off how great he is. What happens in the story of Vashti? Vashti is also making a party. Why do we have separate parties? Why do you think they have separate? You think the people of Persia are so modest that they need a separation between men and women? I think the story is the exact opposite. The separation is to help the husbands be separate from the women. During the meal, they're all sitting together. But when the husbands want to go wild, they send their women outside. Why does Vashti refuse to come? She knows that she's not being invited just to show her beauty. Some of the men there are going to come, drunk. They're not going to just look with their eyes. So she went and refuses to be an object in the hands of the servants. We recall another person who refused. Joseph refused to come and to be with the wife of Potiphar. And here we see Vashti is the same thing. She understands what the purpose is. Finally, we have the court of the king. What are they dealing with? They're dealing with what should they do to Vashti, who refuses to come by the word of the God. We're a very critical time in the kingdom. All men, women are not going to listen to them. So this is the story of chapter 1 of the book of Esther. Why do we need this chapter? What does this chapter add? I think we can put our finger on 3 options to explain why do we need chapter 1 of the book. Number 1, we see later on that Mordechai begs Esther to go to the king and pray for her people. And Esther says, no, I can't, it's dangerous. Chapter 1 of the book of Esther shows us what happens to a woman who is invited to come and doesn't come. And we see what danger Esther puts herself in when she is not called and does come. This is no kind of king that is going to let her get away with it. And therefore, she knows what danger she's going to get herself in. So chapter 1 first shows us what happens, what this king is trying, whose wife doesn't listen to him, he can punish her. And from here we can learn how great the danger that Esther is putting herself in. The second point, I think, is that the people of Israel are not mentioned in the entire book. The name of the people, not the book, not Torah, not the temple. The whole story of the party of the inner courtyard, the outer courtyard, reminds us of the temple. We're talking about people who are living in a time when there is a temple. And they are forgetting the temple. They're forgetting the existence of the temple. These are the people of Israel. They're celebrating with a king whose house resembles the temple, whose party reminds us of the courtyard of Belshazzar with the tools of the temple. And we know that the book is not by accident not mentioning this. The book is putting a finger pointing at the people of Israel. Where are you? Are you guys busy celebrating, enjoying yourselves in the house of the king when you're not going to live in the land of Israel with the temple? And I think the final point, if we spoke about chapter 1, telling us about the greatness of Esther, telling us about the people of Israel, the final point is Achashverosh. Achashverosh wants to be the king of the world. He rules over the entire empire from India all the way to Kush. He is the unarguable king. He is the leader of the world. He's in a palace and he wants the whole world to recognize how great he is. What do we see? Not only can he rule the world only in his own household, he's not the ruler. And we see that this is something that is very important to remember. We see again and again, there are leaders who feel that they are the leaders of the world. Comes here the Bible and says, what is your ability to rule in your own house? What is your ability to have an impact on your own house? You, Achashverosh, later we'll see throughout the book where your kingdom was leading to. But from the very beginning, you're there celebrating and showing off. And you want your wife to be the symbol of the world. And your wife is not listening to you. And is not cooperating with you. Do you realize that in the past chapter, there's not one dialogue between Achashverosh and his own wife? When he sends to his wife, he speaks through middlemen. He doesn't talk to his wife. He wants to be the ruler of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue on in the next chapters of the book of Esther. I invite you all to join me tomorrow at 6 p.m. to a live reading from Jerusalem, the book of Esther. I hope to tape some more lessons in the book of Esther. Thank you so much for joining. Shalom to all of you from Jerusalem and a very happy Purim.